It was a clear, warm morning on April 15, 1975, when the routine at Little Oaks Academy, the exclusive kindergarten tucked into the hills of Bel Air, California, was shattered. At around 9:15 a.m., teachers were gathering the kids back inside after outdoor play when they realized one of their littlest students was missing. 4-year-old Tommy Wentworth IV, son of movie star Thomas Wentworth III and socialite Diane Cabot Wentworth, had simply vanished. One moment he was kicking around a ball near the fence, the next he was gone. No one had seen him leave. No one had heard anything strange. Yet Tommy was nowhere to be found. Panic set in almost immediately. The staff scrambled across the playground, calling his name. Security checked the surrounding grounds. That's when they found the rear service gate, the one that was always locked, hanging open. It hadn't been forced, someone had just undone the latch. The day had started off beautiful, cloudless skies, a light breeze in the trees, and temperatures hovering around 68 degrees. Now the air felt heavy and tense. A few minutes later, a volunteer mom named Lydia Crane mentioned something odd. She had noticed a tan panel van idling across the back service road that morning, right around the time the kids went out to play. She thought the driver was just a maintenance worker. He looked ordinary enough, mid-30s, Caucasian, dark hair, blue coveralls, and didn't seem out of place. But now, in light of Tommy's disappearance, that little detail took on a chilling new meaning. Deputies were on the scene within minutes. They found tire tracks in the dirt outside the open gate and a trail of boot prints, men's size 10, leading to where the van must have been parked. But there was no sign of Tommy, no sign of a struggle, and nothing left behind. By 10:22 a.m., a statewide Amber Alert had been issued. Roadblocks went up around Bel Air. LAPD helicopters swept over the neighborhoods. Police put the Wentworth mansion under heavy guard. Everyone knew, with the kind of fame and money the Wentworths had, this wasn't just a runaway or a prank. This was serious. And then, just before noon, the first ransom call came in. The voice on the other end of the line was cold and matter-of-fact. $500,000. No cops. Wait for instructions. Then the line went dead. The nightmare had only just begun. The ransom call hit like a hammer. At exactly 11:47 a.m., the phone rang inside the Wentworth's sprawling Bel Air mansion. It was Diane who answered, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped the receiver. Thomas Wentworth III stood close by, pale and silent, clenching and unclenching his fists. The voice on the line was a man's, low, flat, almost bored. "We have your boy. 500,000. You'll hear more soon. Don't be stupid." Click. No bargaining. No emotion. Just an amount and a threat. The FBI agents who had quietly slipped into the Wentworth home as the news broke, Special Agent Robert Kingsley and his team, immediately took control. They scrambled to trace the call. Within minutes, a report came back, payphone, Van Nuys, about 18 miles northeast. A dead end. Tension inside the mansion grew unbearable. Diane was hysterical, Thomas vacillated between stunned silence and explosive anger. Their personal assistant, Marie Lennington, paced the hallway biting her fingernails to the quick. Even the FBI agents, trained for chaos, kept glancing at the clock. Special Agent Kingsley laid it out simply. This isn't just a kidnapping. Whoever took Tommy knew how to get close without being seen. They're organized. That means the first call is only the start. At 2:05 p.m., the phone rang again. This time, Thomas picked it up, his voice low and steady. The instructions were clear. Prepare $500,000 in unmarked, small denomination bills. Place the money inside a dark duffel bag. Wait for a third call to tell them where to deliver it. No cops, no FBI, no helicopters. Or he dies. Marie scribbled every word onto a notepad as Diane sobbed quietly in the background. The agents listened in, recording everything, cataloging every syllable. The caller's voice was calm but slipped once, pronouncing "thousand" with a faint Midwestern twang. A small clue, but something. They moved fast. The Wentworth's bank pulled the cash together within an hour. Agent Kingsley and his forensic techs carefully photographed and recorded each serial number. Hidden inside the stack of cash, they placed two tiny, battery-operated tracking devices, a brand new technology at the time, untested in real-world ransom cases. It was a risk, but no one dared rely solely on hope. While the agents prepared the money, Diane sat clutching one of Tommy's sneakers in her lap, rocking back and forth on the living room sofa. "I should have kept him home today," she whispered. "I should have never." Thomas knelt beside her, gripping her hand so tightly it turned white. Outside, LAPD detectives blocked off access to the Wentworth property. Every few minutes, someone peeked nervously at the long, empty driveway, half expecting a van to come barreling in, or worse, a body. But the kidnappers weren't coming to them. They had other plans. And time, for Tommy, was running out. While the Wentworth mansion buzzed with agents, plans, and whispered prayers, 4-year-old Tommy Wentworth IV sat alone in the dark. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know why he was there. He just knew he was cold, scared, and the place smelled awful, like metal and oil and something rotten. The kidnappers had stashed Tommy inside a rusted tool shed on the back lot of an abandoned farm north of Van Nuys. From the outside, it looked like nothing, just a dented shack, half sinking into dead grass and dust. Inside, it was worse. They had thrown down a thin, stained mattress on the dirt floor. A gallon jug of water sat a few feet away. A plastic bucket stood in the corner, his toilet. A heavy padlock rattled against the shed door whenever the wind kicked up. Tommy had been told not to cry. The man with the dark hair and the rough, tobacco-smelling voice, Leroy, knelt beside him early on, put a thick hand on his tiny shoulder, and growled. "Be a good boy. Stay quiet. Mommy and Daddy are coming soon." Then he smiled, but not a kind smile, and slammed the door shut, locking it from the outside. Sometimes another man came, skinnier, more nervous, always glancing around, Walter. Walter barely spoke. He just dropped off food, old sandwiches, stale crackers, or changed the water jug, muttering to himself. They never left Tommy alone for long. One of them was always nearby. Always listening. At night, the shed got cold. Tommy huddled under a scratchy tan blanket, staring at the slats of light that leaked in through the cracks in the walls. He whispered to himself to stay brave. "Mommy's coming. Daddy's coming. Mommy's coming. Daddy's coming." Hours blurred into a gray mass. He lost track of how many times Leroy shouted at Walter. Or how many times Walter cursed about the money, and the heat, and the feds. Sometimes Tommy heard them arguing outside the shed, angry and loud. "They're stalling, man. What if they called the cops?" "Shut up. They'll pay. They got money comin' out their ears." "Yeah. What if they ain't stupid? What if they're following us right now?" Footsteps would stomp away. Doors would slam. Then silence. Tommy didn't understand all the words. But he knew enough to be afraid. Back at the FBI's command center inside the Wentworth's library, Special Agent Kingsley pinned markers on a huge Los Angeles map, every payphone, every service road, every abandoned building in a 30-mile radius. They knew the clock was ticking. They knew they were running out of time to find Tommy alive. But in that tiny, filthy shed, Tommy didn't know about maps or agents or rescue missions. He only knew it was getting dark again. And he was still alone. As dusk fell over Los Angeles, the Wentworths sat frozen by the phone, every second stretching out like a lifetime. At exactly 5:20 p.m., the phone rang. Thomas Wentworth III answered. His voice barely held steady. The caller gave short, clipped instructions. Griffith Park. South entrance. Third bench from the gate. Drop the bag. Walk away. 10 minutes. Alone. Click. No hesitation. No chance to respond. Special Agent Kingsley gave the order, stick to the plan, minimal surveillance, no direct confrontation, track from a distance. The money was already packed, $500,000 in unmarked small bills inside a dark duffel, the tracking devices carefully hidden among the stacks. Thomas refused protection. He insisted on delivering the ransom himself. The night air was cool and restless as he drove to Griffith Park, two unmarked FBI vehicles shadowing him far enough back not to raise suspicion. The park, normally bustling during the day, was eerie now, paths empty, playgrounds still, lights casting long, broken shadows across the cracked pavement. Thomas parked near the south entrance. He stepped out, his hands trembling, duffel bag slung low over his shoulder. Ahead, the third bench sat under a flickering street lamp. He placed the bag under the bench and sat down, pretending to retie his shoe, just as instructed. In the surrounding gloom, unseen FBI eyes watched, cameras ready, radio silent. 5 minutes dragged by. Then 6. 7. Thomas's heart pounded in his ears. At 6:47 p.m., movement. A man emerged from the trees, about mid-30s, average build, dark hair under a cap, wearing what looked like oil-stained jeans and a sweatshirt. The man moved fast but not hurriedly, with the easy motion of someone who had done this before. He approached the bench, crouched low, pretended to scratch his ankle, and in the same motion, grabbed the duffel. Thomas dared a glance up. Their eyes met for a split second. The man's gaze was empty. No fear. No anger. Just cold calculation. The man took off down a side path at a jog, blending into the darkness. Agents waited a full 10 seconds before following, just long enough not to spook him. He made his way to a battered motorcycle, hidden behind a stand of bushes along Vista del Valle Drive. By the time the agents moved to intercept, the man had already fired up the engine and peeled away into the traffic flowing along Los Feliz Boulevard. The trackers inside the bag blinked once. Twice. Then silence. Either they were disabled or the bag had been tossed, they didn't know. Kingsley slammed his hand against the dashboard of the surveillance car. The opportunity to tail the kidnappers, gone. The sting of failure was bitter. But Kingsley refused to let despair settle. This isn't over, he muttered to himself. Meanwhile, the kidnappers now had the money. And the fate of Tommy Wentworth IV still hung in the balance. The only question was, would they keep their word? For hours after the ransom drop, the Wentworth mansion sat locked in unbearable silence. Diane clutched Tommy's baby blanket to her chest. Thomas stood by the windows, arms crossed so tightly across his chest it looked like he might snap. The FBI agents watched the clock, the phones, the roads, waiting for something, anything. No one said it aloud, but the thought hung in the air like a storm cloud. What if the kidnappers took the money, and ran? At 9:31 p.m., a phone call finally came. But it didn't go to the Wentworths. It went to the Hollywood division of the LAPD. The caller, voice disguised and mechanical, spoke just 9 words. Boy tied up behind Sunset Suds Laundry. Come now. Then the line went dead. No further demands. No instructions. No taunts. Just a location. Police raced across town, sirens off, tires screeching through half-deserted streets. Sunset Suds Laundry was a small, battered laundromat squeezed between a pawn shop and a liquor store off Magnolia Boulevard, the kind of place no one noticed unless they had to. Behind the building, tucked between dumpsters and a cracked cinderblock wall, officers found him. Tommy. He was sitting against a metal pole, loosely tied with an old rope, wrapped in a tan blanket. His face was smudged with dirt. His clothes were rumpled. His tiny sneakers were muddy and scuffed. But when the officer called his name, Tommy's head snapped up, and he burst into tears. The officer dropped to his knees, wrapping the boy in his arms, his voice breaking. "You're safe now, buddy. You're safe." Paramedics rushed Tommy to Children's Hospital Los Angeles. His vitals were weak but stable. Mild dehydration. Early signs of hypothermia. Bruises and light abrasions on his wrists from the ropes. No signs of serious injury or abuse. The doctors declared him a miracle. Special Agent Kingsley arrived minutes later. He kept his distance at first, FBI protocol, but when Tommy spotted a familiar face from the house, he reached out wordlessly. Kingsley knelt by the hospital bed and spoke in a low, careful voice. "Tommy, buddy. Can you tell me what happened?" The boy, his voice hoarse from fear and cold, gave a child's version of the truth. "Two bad men. Smelled funny. Stayed in a little metal house. One yelled a lot. One smoked all the time. Rode in a bumpy car. They said if I cried, Mommy wouldn't come." Tommy's description matched everything the FBI had pieced together, but they still had no names, no clear faces, no addresses. They had gotten Tommy back. But the men who had taken him, and the ransom money, were still out there. Somewhere. Plotting their next move. Or maybe already running scared. Special Agent Kingsley stood by the hospital window, looking out into the Los Angeles night. This wasn't over. Not even close. The morning after Tommy's rescue, the FBI's temporary command center inside the Wentworth mansion was a hive of movement. The boy was safe, but the case was not closed. Special Agent Kingsley called an emergency meeting at 7 a.m. No coffee. No small talk. Just the facts. They had a rough physical description of one kidnapper. They had partial tire impressions from the school and park scenes. They had a cash ransom filled with recorded serial numbers. And they had a frightened little boy's memories of a van and two angry men. First break, the tire impressions. Field technicians compared casts from Little Oaks Academy and Griffith Park. The match was perfect, a distinctive tread pattern from a 1969 Dodge A100 panel van, a model rarely seen anymore, especially in tan. Second break, surveillance footage. At a Van Nuys gas station, just a few miles from where the ransom call had originated, a blurry security tape showed a tan van pulling up at 10:50 a.m. on the day Tommy was taken. The camera wasn't great. The man was partly in shadow. But still. Average build. Dark hair. Blue coveralls. It matched the earlier witness description from Lydia Crane, the volunteer mom. Third break, DMV records. A rapid database search narrowed things down fast. In the greater Los Angeles area, there were only 4 registered tan Dodge A100 vans. One name stood out. Leroy Allen Bishop, 34, last known address, Reseda, California. Bishop had priors, burglary, unlawful restraint, but no serious prison time. He was known to hang around motorcycle garages, day labor sites, and the cheaper bars off Sepulveda Boulevard. It fit too perfectly to be coincidence. 4:15 p.m., April 17, a search warrant was secured. By 5:20 p.m., the FBI and LAPD tactical teams surrounded Bishop's dingy duplex. Inside, they found a set of stained blue mechanic's coveralls. A frayed length of rope matching the type used to tie Tommy. Stacks of cash hidden inside a torn sofa, many bills matching the ransom serial numbers. A beat-up motorcycle helmet and riding gloves, tucked under the bed. But Bishop wasn't home. Neighbors said he had been crashing off and on with his cousin in Burbank, a guy who worked on bikes and owed everybody money. The cousin's name? Walter Dean Mercer, 30, ex-mechanic, no fixed address. Early the next morning, April 18, surveillance team spotted Mercer's motorcycle parked outside a rundown motel off the 5 freeway. Agents moved fast. Inside room 112, they found Mercer, disheveled, chain-smoking, and immediately panicking when the badges came out. It took just 3 hours of questioning for him to crack. Mercer laid it out. Bishop had orchestrated everything, /N. Bishop had chosen Tommy Wentworth specifically because rich folks pay fast. /N. Mercer had been the driver, /N. They had stashed Tommy at an abandoned farm property Leroy's uncle used to own, /N. Mercer swore he'd never touched the boy except to bring him food. Pushed harder, Mercer admitted he was terrified, not of the FBI, but of Bishop. Leroy said if I squealed, he muttered, I'd end up in a ditch. Meanwhile, about 100 miles north at a roadside diner outside Bakersfield, a patrol officer spotted a dusty tan Dodge A100 van with a man sleeping inside. A quick radio check confirmed it. Leroy Bishop. Bishop was arrested without incident. He didn't fight. Didn't argue. Just climbed out of the van, smirking, and said, "Told you they'd pay." He had a battered duffel bag under the front seat. Inside were the rest of the ransom bills, and a loaded .38 revolver. He never got the chance to use it. When they dragged Leroy Bishop into custody, he didn't look like the monster the newspapers would later describe. No wild eyes. No struggle. Just a beaten man in a dirty jacket who looked more tired than dangerous. Walter Mercer, by contrast, folded like paper under pressure. Facing federal kidnapping charges, and the possibility of life behind bars, he cut a deal almost immediately, full testimony against Bishop in exchange for a reduced sentence. Special Agent Kingsley and his team moved quickly, piling up evidence. Marked ransom bills recovered from both suspects. Fiber analysis linking the rope and cloth from the shed directly to materials found in Bishop's van. Tommy's own words, a frightened little boy who picked Leroy out of a photo lineup and said simply, "That's the man who took me." The trial began in January 1976 in federal court, downtown Los Angeles. It was a media circus, but security was tight. The courtroom was packed every day, reporters, sketch artists, even off-duty police officers who just wanted to see the men who would kidnap a 4-year-old for money. The prosecution laid it out cold. The planning, /N. The execution, /N. The months of surveillance they believed Bishop had done on Little Oaks Academy, /N. The brutal indifference shown to a child left alone in a freezing metal shed. Tommy's parents, Thomas and Diane Wentworth, testified, their faces pale and their voices shaking. They told the jury about the phone calls. About the waiting. About the awful silence. About hearing their son's voice for the first time after days of fearing the worst. And then, when the courtroom was dead silent, they played the ransom calls over the speaker system. The cold, casual voice. The dead promises. The defense tried to paint Bishop and Mercer as desperate men, pushed by poverty into a bad decision that, thankfully, caused no permanent harm. It didn't work. The jury took just under 6 hours to come back. Verdicts. Leroy Bishop, guilty on all counts, federal kidnapping, extortion, conspiracy, child endangerment. Walter Mercer, guilty, but with recommendation for reduced sentencing based on cooperation. Sentences. Leroy Bishop, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, one of the harshest sentences possible at the time under federal law. Walter Mercer, 45 years to life, with eligibility for parole after serving 30 years. When the verdict was read, Bishop just smiled faintly and shook his head. Mercer wept openly. Aftermath. The Wentworth family withdrew from public life for a time. They installed fortress-level security around their Bel Air mansion. Tommy Wentworth IV eventually recovered physically, but it took years of therapy before he could sleep without a light on, or go outside without clinging to one of his parents. The case had ripple effects across the country. Private schools nationwide overhauled their security systems. Kidnapping laws were stiffened, especially regarding ransom cases. Tracking devices for ransom money, once experimental, became standard procedure for the FBI. As for Leroy Bishop and Walter Mercer, they faded into history, buried in the prison system. But in Los Angeles, even years later, people remembered. The story of the boy kidnapped from kindergarten, and the cold men who thought they could get away with it, stayed alive in the whispers of a city that had seen too many dark things to ever forget one this cruel.